I don't really have the ability to use my good microphone this week. And I'm a bit behind on my Korean, honestly. For whatever reason, the chapter I'm trying to memorize is a little harder for some reason to get down. I just keep kind of, I think I just haven't been studying enough. And I've been working on Chinese a bit more. So I do have a memorized paragraph I'm going to do for Chinese, but I want to wait till I have the microphone and I'll do that as a Chinese video, I think. I want to talk about the intermediate plateau and what that looks like for me in Chinese. And there was a bit of denial, I think, associated with the intermediate plateau where like I worked so hard to get to the level that I was at, like initially, you know, when I had my big initial years-long push of getting really good at Chinese, I started to coast at some point, you know, like, and I was coasting, and because I lived in China at the time and had Chinese friends and did a lot of stuff in Chinese all the time, I think I kind of convinced myself that my Chinese was better than it really was. And you know, there were certain like instances I can cite, and I will, that kind of showed me, no, your Chinese really isn't that good. You need to keep working. And the denial was strong enough that I kind of like, you know, I kind of just subconsciously made excuses, I think, to myself, and excused myself from having to continue improving. And that, you know, that was a long time ago. That was 2010, 2011, and we're way past that now. But that was really it, you know, like it's called a plateau, and it's been a very long plateau for me. But like, I'll tell you what it looks like for me. And I think it's quite easy to fall into this. A lot of people talk about the intermediate plateau. So, and it can be in any language, obviously. Like, it doesn't have to be Chinese. I think I avoided the plateau in German because I read so much. I lived in Germany in a more immersive environment, and I read a lot of like real difficult novels. And I think that just kind of, and maybe also just the similarity between German and English. There's a thing with like Romance languages and Germanic languages. When you get to a more advanced level, the words start becoming the same words, right? Like, you have all these Latin root words that end up being the same in those languages, even in German. And so that plateau doesn't seem as bad, maybe. But so for Chinese, what happened to me was I got conversational, and I think that's how the plateau starts for a lot of people, is you get conversational and you're like, oh wow, I'm existing in this language. I'm not finding myself in conversations where I can't get through. Like, I'm always able to sit. I was able to sit down at a bar with somebody I just met and talk to them for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, and I could just hold the conversation. And so that gave me this confidence of like, okay, I've achieved my goal. But one strategy I developed, which was honestly very, you know, it's a double-edged sword strategy, and in hindsight, it's more detrimental than it is useful, where I developed a very good sense of how to avoid saying things that I didn't know how to say. I developed an ability to steer a conversation and keep it in a direction where I could say the things I needed to say. And I've noticed people like, what's his name? Why don't I know his name? It's not Xiao Lao Shu. Xiao Man NYC. Is it just Xiao Man? I think it's Xiao Man. The guy who's like amazing, like white guy, speaks amazing Chinese, wow's Chinese restaurant worker or whatever, that guy. I think it's Xiao Man. I don't remember why I can't remember his name. But that guy, he has a very strong ability to steer conversations and keep them on the track that he is comfortable in. It's a real skill you could have. And, like, to put it in the perspective of, like, I like to play a lot of games like Dominion, StarCraft, where you build up your economy and then you pivot at some point. You're done building and now you're doing stuff. And in a sense of a language, like, if you were in a position where it was like life or death, get through the conversation or you die, that would be it's a great strategy to be able to keep a conversation focused in the way that lets you not stumble, right? But on the other end, if you're still trying to grow, if you're still trying to improve, stumbling is how you get better. And so the better you are at steering a conversation away from a stumbling point, the less you're going to improve. You're just going to have the same kind of conversation over and over, and that's it. So part, like, and to give you a really concrete example of how this looked, I still don't remember the fucking word. The Chinese word for driver's license, I want to say it's just jia. Is it jia zheng? I don't remember. I honestly don't. I never remember the word. And like I mentioned I did post a video where I talked for like 30 minutes in Chinese, and I talked about this, where if I could say a thing without having to learn the new word, I would just say the thing in the way that I could. So, for example, in China, not everybody drives. In America, everybody drives. It's not even worth talking about. But in China, it's a thing you can be like, it's a conversation icebreaker thing. You can ask people if they drive or not. It's just like if they ask you that, you can ask them that. It's a thing that people ask. At least back then it was, at least. And so I would just say, 那你会不会开车？你会开车吗? So, do you know how to drive? Right? 你会不会开车? And that's 会不会 is a pattern you learn, like, I don't know, in your first or second month of Chinese. 开车is again, second month of Chinese kind of sentence. So I could say that 你会不会开车？你会开车吗? And if they say 会, then it was kind of self-evident that they have their driver's license. And if they didn't, it didn't, it wasn't worth splitting hairs over, whatever. Okay, you can drive, but you don't have your driver's license. But I'm not going to ask that because I can never remember the word for driver's license, right? And then if people ask me, do you have your driver's license? I understood it, but I never myself forced myself to use the word in a conversation, and thus I never really acquired the word. And 20 years later, I still can't remember the word. It's jia, like jia something, and then I want to say it's just jia zheng. I should have looked it up before I made the video, but I don't remember. So, like, that's one example, but imagine doing that for everything. So for instance, like, just entire conversations where I'm employing that strategy over and over. There are specifically Chinese ways to say certain things, and I'd acquired enough grammar patterns to say most of what I needed to get any kind of point across that I needed. But once I got to that's the plateau. I got to that point where I could do that and stay in a conversation without feeling stressed about it or feeling like I couldn't get my point across. And then I said, okay, and then subconsciously, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to learn any new stuff. And one example of a point, so I mentioned there was a point where I subconsciously realized this and denied it. I was working full-time as an English teacher, but my school that I worked at let me go into the Chinese classes for free as like a benefit of the job. And, in my own, like, how do I phrase this? like I mentioned, I thought I was better than I was, so I wanted to go into the advanced class. I didn't want to go in the intermediate class. Um, Now, had I been fully committed to the advanced class, had I applied the same type of I studied an insane amount when I first started learning this language. Had I continued with those kind of habits, the advanced class would have been right for me. I would have been okay. Um, it was actually a great situation. All of my classmates were from Vietnam. All Vietnam, and there were like 2 from Russia. There were no native English speakers in the class. And the entire class, even though they were all Vietnamese, they actually spoke to each other in Chinese. The Russians spoke in Chinese to each other. It was a really kind of, you don't usually get that. Like, let's just put it that way. That's pretty rare. And so I had like these classmates from Vietnam, and they were all talking to me in Chinese, and they were really cool. And it was a good opportunity to make more friends that I could speak Chinese with. But the problem was the class schedule conflicted with my own work schedule. So I was only able to attend half of the classes, and it was hard. Like it was like I said, had I been really good studious and like hardcore about it, I could have kept up. But what I did is it was really hard. It was, I was struggling with the grammar patterns we were learning, and I was struggling with some of the vocab, and it wasn't easy. And I told myself, well, man, it's hard, and I can't even go to all the classes. So every time I go to a class, I'm behind because I missed a class, and I have to work full time, and I just can't keep up. And I made that excuse, and I stopped going to class. And I think I only attended the classes for like 3 weeks maybe, and then I just totally stopped, just completely gave up. And it's sad because the real reason I was even in China was to get better at Chinese. But by that point, I was just burned out, I guess. I made up that excuse. I'm like, well, I've got my Chinese friends. I'm going to keep speaking the language and getting better like that. And then I tried to read books, and I couldn't read the books. And that was another example of something pointing out that I was plateaued at an intermediate level and didn't want to admit it. Because I opened a book. I was trying to read 1984, actually, a book I'd read like twice in English already. And so I just got a book. I got the copy in the bookstore and tried to read it. And there were just too many characters I didn't know. Like, just when you're trying to read and you consistently are hitting words you don't even know how to pronounce, it was frustrating. And I stuck with it for a week or so and then just gave up on it. I was like, man, this is brutal. I can't even get through. Like, I'm going so slow, and I'm not understanding enough. It's too hard. And that was another sign that I'm not as good at this as I think I am. And what's the answer? The answer isn't just, okay, well, I need to go keep having conversations where I use my strategy of avoiding the words that I don't know. The answer was more like, okay, you need to stop. Like, if you really want to use this opportunity to get better at Chinese, you need to give up, stop hanging out with your English-speaking coworkers so much. Stop watching YouTube videos in English. Switch over to Chinese. Go hang out with those Vietnamese people who actually watch Chinese stuff and are trying to really assimilate. Go hang out with them. Speak Chinese all day as much as you can. That's what I needed to do. Find a book that you can read. Get it on your iPad so you can look up the characters, at least look up the pinyin when you don't know how to say a character. Do what you need to do to get better. And that's kind of what I'm doing now, 20 years later. But, it's like the plateau, like, and a little bit further on why did the plateau last for so long? I mean, like, I came back to the US, and I worked at a job which I worked for a university processing visa documentation, and a lot of the people that I was processing stuff for were from China. And so I did, in that job, I did have to speak Chinese maybe a few times a week. And I learned, for that specific job, I learned a lot of the terminology for that specific job. So I plateaued, but it was like, okay, well, for my job, I'm speaking Chinese, and I learned like the words that I needed for visa processing, like qian zheng and stuff like that. Yeah, 你的签证是一个 J1 的签证，但是你如果要换一个签证，得到 H1 的签证就不行。Like that's the kind of things I would say to some of the Chinese people. Like 你有 J1 的话，不能得到 H1，你要回国之后就可以应聘新的签证，新的 H1 的签证。Like that's the kind of stuff I would say. And as I say that, I hate you. Like I can hear the mistakes I make as I speak Chinese, the tones falling off, the awkwardness of it. I know I'm plateaued, man. Like I'm not trying to come off as I'm awesome at Chinese. And so, I had those like use cases of it, like for my job. And the Chinese people loved it when I could speak Chinese with them, because they're a lot of like the people on J1 visas from China, they're generally speaking coming into labs where everybody's speaking Chinese. They want to exist in a Chinese bubble, and they love it when the guy helping with their visa can speak Chinese. And like my Chinese was good enough that they preferred to speak Chinese with me when they could. And that's not true of all of them, but a lot of them were like that. But I didn't have any real motivation or incentive to get better than like I needed to. I didn't need to be able to discuss literature with them. I didn't need to be able to really like do more than I needed to. And that's kind of what I think that's what the plateau comes down to a lot, is like you start out as a beginner and you're so motivated, like, man, imagine if I could hold a conversation in this language. Imagine if I could express myself in this language. And then you bust your ass for years, and suddenly you can do that. You're suddenly doing the thing you dreamt of doing. And then the temptation is like, okay, well, here I am. I guess I'm done. And you're never really done with a language. You always can improve. And I think for me, I just was content to plateau, and then but I know I no longer am, and I'm trying to remedy that now. So thanks for watching. Bye.